might be wondering, why is this important? Why is this TikTok sound that was popular a year ago so important to talk about now? Well, the phrase, "you need to leave," actually comes from a discussion where parents were addressing issues in a school. By rolling back this clip, we can get a little bit more context from this discussion.
I remember when I went to his bedroom to say goodnight, and he was crying because of the abuse that he was enduring in this school system.
Then why did you stay in Mexico?
This father is addressing the issues that his son experienced in his school, and a man made a racist comment towards him. Although we can't directly assume that the son experienced racial prejudice in his school, we can tell that this man got a racist comment made against him, and he's only one of the millions of Latinos in the United States who experience racial backlash like this. It's important to discuss how Latinos are affected by living in the United States, and this is why I examine different aspects of the Latino communities in order to see these effects. Alright, so obviously there's still some discrimination in today's society, but unfortunately there was even more discrimination in the 20th century, and it still has effects on older generations of Latinos. According to the PBS documentary Prejudice and Pride, there was a lot of inequality in the 1950s and the 1960s in the education system of America. Eventually, a man named Sal Castro noticed this inequality, and he wanted to organize student walkouts and student protests, peaceful protests, in order to prove to the school districts that Latino education mattered. And eventually, those school districts listened. They listened to the growing concern of Latino education. They wanted better education. So eventually, they gained it. And schools across America gained this equality, along with the civil rights movement, which helped a lot. However, like I said, there's still older generations of Latinos that experienced this discrimination and didn't have access to great education. Additionally, there was still discrimination that was experienced in the 1980s and the 1990s. According to my historical event that I analyzed, in the year 1980, there was a Miami-Dade County ordinance that was an English-only law, and it was made because of the influx of Cuban immigrants in Florida that year, and people didn't want Cubans to have all the resources they could, so they took away Spanish resources. This stopped 911 calls from being able to be spoken in Spanish. Hurricane warnings couldn't be given in Spanish anymore. Stuff like that, essential resources in Spanish that was helping the Cuban community that recently immigrated to Florida. But now it was just completely eradicated, and the English-only law made it so that Cubans could not get these resources anymore. This is a prime example of discrimination in Florida in recent years, too, since this ordinance lasted 13 years until 1993. This discrimination obviously affected populations of Latino communities because it took away resources from them. Relating to the topic of English-only laws that try to diminish the use of Spanish is the topic of the Spanish language itself. According to the Panorama episode, Assimilation, Latinos, and the Life in America, the Spanish language tends to stop being used in the second or third generation of immigrants. And this is caused by repetitive years of assimilation and the popularity of the use of the English language. So English kind of takes over the Spanish language, or in other cases, we see the mixing of English and Spanish into a language called Spanglish. And it's pretty much a mix of talking Spanish and English. But even without talking about the topic of assimilation, the Spanish language can still get changed and adapted in various ways. One of these ways is outlined by the author of the opinion piece I analyzed, entitled, "For Most Latinos, Latinx Does Not Mark the Spot." So to give some context, Latinx is a gender-neutral term that's used to describe Latino communities in a gender-neutral fashion. However, the author of my opinion piece believes that Latinx is a form of linguistic imperialism because he feels that it's foreign and imposed for another culture to label Latinos a different name. The author believes this because Latinx changes the grammatical rules of the Spanish language, and it's a word that's imposed on a lot of Latinos by media, and it's used popularly to just describe Latino people in general, but Latinos themselves feels like it's forced upon them, which is why it's a form of linguistic imperialism to change the language. So, although it's not assimilation, it still is a form of changing the Spanish language. So building on these ideas of experiencing some forms of discrimination or experiencing some forms of assimilation into American culture, These both have commonalities in each other, and they form a sense of Latino unity by being a Latino experiencing things in the United States. This form of unity can manifest itself in many ways, such as building some form of nationalism in yourself and pride in yourself, or it can just build into one commonality, one group, which is Hispanic or Latino. The common experience of being a Latino in the United States has created a sense of unity among all nationalities in the United States. The author of my book entitled Latinx, The New Force in American Politics and Culture goes into depth about many aspects of Latino history and Latino experience in the United States. And it describes the unity of all Latin American immigrants to the United States as La Raza. Ed Morales, the author of the book, describes that Latinos don't really fit into a checkbox. They're not either white or black. They're in between. There's so much more than that. They have so much ancestry in indigenous roots, in African roots, in Spanish roots, in all of that. They don't just fit into a box. And this common experience of just not fitting into the racial binary in the United States is something that kind of unites all Latinos. And it creates one unit of people, such as Latinos, Hispanics. Furthermore, in the United States, Latinos coexist with so many different cultures, especially with the African American community. And there's so much syncretism between cultures, like in food and music, and there's so much intersectionality in so many aspects of daily culture that we experience in the United States. And while Latinos might feel a sense of being other and not fitting into the box, like I mentioned beforehand, they might bond that cultural unity with other minorities, such as the African American community. And that's actually very common. And you can see a lot of intersectionality between African American communities and Latino communities, especially in the Puerto Rican community, as they do have a lot of indigenous and African roots in their ancestry. Ultimately, it's clear to see that Latino communities have experienced a bunch of adaptations, whether it be adaptations in how they're treated in society, adaptations of how they grow in America in order to try to find their own sense of equality, adaptations in their culture and assimilation in their language, or if it's adaptations in nationalism and unity in themselves and pride. At the end of the day, it's essential to discuss how Latino communities are affected by living in the United States. I mean, we take up 18.4% of the population. It's important to discuss different aspects of society like this. And these changes that Latinos have experienced, whether it be good or bad, we still flourish through living in the United States. And these adaptations might improve our Latino identity and enrich us. Thank you.